Welcome to our study of magic dance, the display of the self-nature of the 5 wisdom dakinis. I like to say that, or as I often say, my intention with presenting something like this is in no way to pretend that I could fathom the vast knowledge, the vast wisdom that this work really reflects, which really you could say in some way, we sometimes refer to the teachings of the teacher as the relics of the Dharmakaya. And I would argue that when we read a text like this, we could mingle with the wisdom of the teacher. Somehow the words, particularly words like this, which were where the teaching was actually composed in English by the author, they have some magic quality. And also it has the ability to penetrate our ordinary conceptual mind, not in the sense of that we don't understand what he's talking about, and hopefully there's some dimension of something mystical that will transpire, but rather as in addition to all what is being said here, which actually is very, you could say, rational, in addition to that, there's a sense of the teacher's presence. And this we have also when we read works by, say, Paltry Rinpoche or Longchenpa and so on. There's a dimension of a blessing. This, of course, is contingent on our openness, on our respect, on our interest and our awe of the author. But if that is there, then definitely we have something that has this capacity to really transmit something which is beyond the words. And so my objective with this course is really simply just to say there is this wonderful work. And because I had the fortune to meet Thinley Norbu Rinpoche on a few brief occasions, and because I've always had this deep respect and devotion for Thinley Norbu Rinpoche, then I'm happy to do this. But of course, this is an ordinary person trying to convey that which is truly extraordinary. Anyway, that said, here we are, and I'm very happy that you're here and that we're undertaking this study together. As I was just earlier tonight, I was looking at a short documentary about the 16th Karmapa, how he would train his students. And just thinking about the different styles that teachers, they adapt. And you can say there's this magical web of enlightenment that permeates the realm of those who aspire to enlightenment. Of course, it's there everywhere, particularly for those who aspire to enlightenment. We have so many different, there's so many different ways in which enlightenment manifests. And there's so many different ways in which what we can call the supreme Nirmanakayas manifest. And so you have the very regal manifestation of the Karmapa. You have the inconspicuous, darker manifestations, such as Thinley Norbu Rinpoche. There are so many different ways that great teachers have manifested, and really all for the purpose of introducing us to this condition that we overlook, that we possess, and yet we fail to recognize them. There's been a few people who, before I did this course, says, "Gosh, I've had this book for many years, and as much as I really loved it, there was many things that weren't quite clear." And so I felt a little bit compelled here today to just want to say something very briefly about what we're undertaking in terms of the theme that runs through this book, and that is the theme between the subtle and the gross, the secret intangible essence, which is the heart of who we are, and which is what we call Buddha nature. It's what here in Rinpoche's work is referred to as wisdom mind with a capital double and M. And this nature is the objective of all the various Buddhist paths. This is what all the various Buddhist masters are intending to show us. So in that way, there's a, you could say, a unified intention everywhere in the Buddhist teaching. What we are aware of, and what particularly is very well, you could say, mapped in the tradition of the Great Perfection, is the way in which ignorance takes birth within us and how it proliferates into delusion. And yet all the time that these appearances, they might manifest, all these delusional appearances manifest, they won't never move from the ground. That means they arise, and yet they're nothing but just, you could say, perverted ways of seeing the original ground. Due to our delusion, the original selfless luminosity of mind is seen as the self. Due to our delusion, the expansive wisdom is seen as other. And the various aspects in which we then perceive, according to relative truth and the sense of person with the 5 skandhas and the sense of the 5 elements, these are intrinsically, they never move from this original ground, and that is why we refer to these then in their pure aspects as the Buddhas and as the consorts of the Buddhas. And that's why we're continually aware of here as we're studying this book how phenomena initially exist as, you could say, the empty great expanse, and yet within that there are subtle qualities that then are objectified and taken as self and taken as other, and this then becomes increasingly solidified, what Rinpoche refers to as increasingly obstructed. And that's where we can then talk about the subtle and the gross. And the subtle and the gross is something that we operate with 24/7 within our conscious life. It's the sense of this person here, right? But you also sense that there's something more subtle behind. There's possibly an individual here that is sitting sincerely wishing to communicate something meaningful. And when we're with other people, we're continually, in addition to observing their physicality, then we're also aware of a more subtle dimension within. And you could say this is the gross and subtle dimensions of the ordinary confused perceptions that we have, seen within the from the scope of within the context of duality. But all the time, this doesn't move. And so there's never a time where the ordinary gross appearances, they actually are, you could say, ultimately separate from the purity. And the purity and impurity that we might be perceiving, this is all based on us. It's all based on our optics. The nature itself is never corrupted, but the way that we perceive nature and the way that we, with the, you could say, the shared population of samsaric beings, we see the nature is then constructed according to our delusional perceptions. And that is where then the general Buddhist path is about gradually eliminating the confusion in this individual. And particularly the resultant Vajrayana path, the method there is to introduce how, as much as confusion has arisen, it never moves. And so all appearances intrinsically exist as deity, as mandala, and so on. So in that way, the Vajrayana method is continually coming back to an awareness of how, alongside confusion, at the same time also there is this dimension of purity. And that's very much where the message in Thinley Norbu Rinpoche's work is very much continually seeing how we have gross substance habit, rather a habit of clinging to phenomena in a, you could say, as from a point of view of a subject-object duality, solidifying things into, you could say, the natural unobstructed nature becomes obstructed. We have that, and at the same time, so we identify how we experience our confusion, and at the same time, Rinpoche is also telling us how this nature exists alongside also a dimension of purity. So that's where there's this continual juxtaposition within where we can actually begin to see how it is that on one hand we fall into delusion, and yet on the other hand, this abiding purity is continually there. This is, of course, what the objective of the teaching is, to introduce us to this abiding purity. So this is a drawing from the first chapter, and again, just summing up what I was just saying. Our inert and stale karmic body and all other substances are the gross element result of our inability in previous lives to recognize the invisible secret essence of all substance. We are lost and suffering because of external staleness and internal ignorance. But even though we cannot recognize our invisible secret essence immediately, it is not necessary to think that it is far away. Our secret essence is always within the gross and subtle elements. Yeah, it's true. Someone's commenting Rinpoche is looking like a samurai. That's true. Very much like that. Very dignified, poised, powerful. So true. Didn't we have it? I'm sorry, I missed the chapter heading here, but of course this chapter is magic and the mysterious. I'm not wrong. Yes. So within that chapter, then this is the first section, mainly on magic. So Rinpoche says at the beginning of the chapter, he says, the minds of all ordinary beings are magicians, whose magic is a deceptive trick through which truth is made untrue, or untruth is made true, for pleasure or for suffering. People are afraid of magic and become superstitious because they divide the gross elements from the subtle elements and mistrust the connection between them. This division habit results in imbalance between the gross and subtle elements. So we make what is true, which is the intangibility of reality, we make that untrue. We think, oh, it's only what we can touch and feel that's real. And we also take that which is completely unreal, untrue, as being true. Namely, we think of things as being solid, permanent. We think of our own particular neurotic desires as leading to happiness. We basically take phenomena which have no reality for having reality. And this results then in this is the way that we perpetuate habits that aim towards gaining pleasure, but which in reality throws into suffering. And all along, there is a sort of suspicion that something is happening underneath. You know, we might be die-hard materialists. We might have a die-hard belief in that the only thing that exists is that which is tangible and true. And yet, we know there's also in reality, you know, you could be a materialist scientist in the laboratory, but when you go home, you know, there's all sorts of dynamics going on with the family and all sorts of strange dynamics going on in our social circles, but interaction between people. And all of that is seen as being something which is beyond our control. And so that generates a particular kind of suspicion, a particular kind of fear. And that's also where we then have the whole notion of power that can take place in terms of magic. All of this, you could say, all this alienation really takes place because we fail to understand really the interaction between what is tangible, visible, and what is intangible and invisible. So Rinpoche says, the mind is like a magician. No, he doesn't say that. This is me summing this up. So the point is, the mind is like a magician, but we view the magical display as real. So there's something that's intangible that we in our delusions solidify. So there's a divide between the created the object and the creator, the subject. And this again, this is intrinsically indivisible. There's nothing out there that is not created by a creator. And that doesn't lie external to ourselves, but this is within our own experience. And failing to recognize the relationship, the individual relationship, which is, of course, this is the condition of sentient beings as opposed to the condition of Buddhists, but this results in us having a mistaken and an imbalanced relationship between subtle and gross elements. The subtle meaning what's going on inside, and the gross is what's visible outside. So Rinpoche himself, he gives this very good example where, for example, when somebody's angry and somebody's smiling, you see something on their face, but you also sense that there's something behind that. So that's the subtle and gross. So we think the negative phenomena are external realities. So this is where we could run into difficulties in our lives. And very often in many cultures, there's a sense that this is due to somebody else. In the ordinary material world, then we think, oh, there's somebody there who's, causing us harm. But also in other cultures where there's more awareness of the subtle, invisible dynamics, then we talk about all sorts of magic that can take place. But the thing is, it is simply the deluded mind. Recently then reading Milarepa's songs, this is also where Milarepa in the beginning, so the first actually section of Milarepa's songs is all about his encountering spirits of various kinds and him recognizing that they have no power over him. They are essentially just karmic manifestations and have no real, you could say, intrinsic reality. So Rinpoche says all existent phenomena arise effortlessly in wisdom mind as unobstructed wisdom magic, which always benefits and never harms. So within the primordial condition of the nature of things, within the mind in which there's no delusion, there's never anything that is obstructed. Everything can manifest there, and yet there's never without falling into duality. Then there's always this wisdom display. There's only benefit. There's spontaneous benefit in terms of the individual, that there's enjoyment, that there's the condition of non-confusion, and there's spontaneously the benefit of others, the manifestations of compassionate qualities. So the ultimate remedy, when again coming back to thinking about in terms of magic spells and circumstances that Rinpoche describes, then the ultimate remedy is the realization of great emptiness, understanding that phenomena have no intrinsic reality, and within that absence of any fixation, then naturally all the qualities of enlightenment, all what we call the supreme aspects of emptiness, are spontaneously present. So within that realization, applying that remedy, then this dissolves our normal fixation and leads to open space, wisdom, mind. So this is where all the various paths of the Buddhist teaching, doesn't matter where we are, whether it's just abstaining from being negative or angry, or taking particular vows of external behavior, or if it's meditating in one way or another, all of these are intended to lead to this open space wisdom mind. If we failing that, then there are ways we can deal with that. So if we do suffer from, you could say, evil eyes, or we suffer from malignant attacks of spirits, derns, and so forth, then there are practices that help us. And the Buddhist teaching, and particularly the Vajrayana, is incredibly skillful in terms of an enormous variety of ways of working with the subtle aspects that can benefit on a very ordinary, immediate secular level. So Rinpoche says, in general, until our dualistic mind is exhausted, we have negative phenomena. Particular demons or ghosts do exist through these phenomena, but we should never think they are different from our own neurotic mind. So on the basis of our countless lives of engaging in this duality of subject and object, then we've generated countless scenarios, reacted within countless scenarios, and these abide as seeds within our unawakened condition. So as long as this unawakened, you could say, ground of our consciousness, the all ground, the alaya vijnana, as long as that still remains just unconscious, then yes, all these various seeds are present. And yet, whatever might manifest from that in terms of harm doing and harm doers, they ultimately do not really move from just being, you could say, the projections of this basic confusion. So there's 4 demonic forces from which we require protection. Normally we talk about, in the Buddhist teaching, we talk about the Skandamara, the Mityumara, the Kleshamara, and the Devaputramara, which are the four maras, which are has to do with the body, has to do with death, has to do with the afflicted mind, and has to do with the mind of self-absorption and pride. Rinpoche, I was trying to think how we could link up these, I think, but it would really just be slightly speculative, so I'd like to avoid that. But I would say there must be a correlation there somehow. Anyway, the first one has to do with the very real external threats and dangers. So that's where we could say there is substantial external threats and dangers. These are an obstruction demon then. And this, of course, Rinpoche makes a very valid point. All the things, for example, we could think about as natural catastrophes. They're not the only catastrophes from our vantage point. They're just the regular moving around of the elements in one way or another. Without the rains or mudslides or earthquakes or what have you, volcanoes. These are just the regular movement of just geological matter. But of course, in terms of our particular existence, these constitute external threats. Then there's the unobstructed demon that has to do with insubstantial psychological, you could say, dimensions. And this affects us. This affects us in terms of how our attitudes are towards things, and also on the basis of, you could say, negative attitudes. We perpetuate negative actions. On the basis of positive attitudes, we engage in positive actions. But all of these really are then forces that hold us. And then there's the more subtle ones then, which are the self-satisfaction demon, which are then the obscuring self-absorption, which might be spiritual of some sort. We might think that we are better in one way or another, and also just generally our attachment to feeling good and being comfortable. Then there's self-righteous demon, and that's again where we see ourselves very much in relation to other and very much keen to consolidate our superiority. So you have then in Rinpoche here, then quoting Rinpoche, he says, in high Vajrayana Buddhism, deities are portrayed stamping on 4 bodies. These bodies are symbolic of the annihilation of the self-righteous demons. So when you see Vajrayana, Ratha Vajrayana deities, then they always stamp on various bodies, and then these can be bodies such as the 4 demons, and particularly then the self-righteous demon. So Rinpoche prays, Lord Buddha, may I transform my ordinary body into splendid wisdom body to be the same as you. Lord Buddha, may I conquer the 4 demons with your most wrathful aspect to be the same as you. Lord Buddha, may I with giant legs of strong compassion crush and annihilate these 4 demons to be the same as you. So this is Rinpoche's aspiration. Rinpoche says, self-satisfaction demons and self-righteous demons are the most dangerous for practitioners. without realizing wisdom mind. A practitioner may seem to become a saint or a sage without abandoning his ego, and through certain sadhanas may attain great powers like a magician. But without a true understanding of our real wisdom nature, and without confidence in our wisdom mind, no matter what powers we attain through practice, if we cannot release our mind from our ego's pride at having attained these powers, it is only the cause of samsara. So Rinpoche quotes somebody, Tuzum Kempa, I guess. Not sure who, the knower of the 3 times. It could be the first Karmapa, it could be other lamas, but anyway, it says there's a lot of saints, but very few realized beings. And that's where, yes, there could be many spiritual people, but not necessarily that egoless. So that's where the danger. This is also something Toltec also so often mentions. The real danger on the path is really pride, this self-satisfaction. So self-righteous demon and self-satisfaction demon. So that's where we can see how practitioners, those who have qualities, those who are famous, they need to guard themselves particularly against these 2 kind of demons. And then Rinpoche gives this story of a rather sad case of a great, you could say, very powerful teacher from Nalanda, who, without really having gained much more than just superficial spiritual powers, ventured into the world to act as a great teacher and failed miserably. So this is the story Rinpoche gives in that that story. And the point is really, without wisdom mind, then we will always be deceived by our neurotic mind's magic. So even if there's a very high level of spiritual accomplishment, without completely breaking through to wisdom mind, or without having wisdom, then we will be very easily deceived by the neurotic mind's magic. The mysterious. So again, within the chapter, Magic and the Mysterious, Rinpoche says, without complete confidence in our wisdom mind, we will continue to be deceived by magic, whether we think it is the magic of demons or whether we think it is the magic of our neurotic minds. Without really understanding, we will view anything mysterious with suspicion, separating subject from object, subtle from gross, and mistrusting the real nature of the wisdom mystery inherent in our own minds. So again, as much as the particularly the modern world, but this has always been the case, as much as we gullible sentient beings believe in the reality of what is tangible, visible, external, then we also know there's something beyond that that we're not quite onto. This really is where we are looking for our happiness. This is where we gain satisfaction. This is where we experience suffering. And yet, this is the dimension that we fail to understand. And we also fail to understand that this is where this apparent external reality originates. So we have the word mysterious, which is really just mysterious as long as something is mysterious as long as we just don't know it. For children, the going-ons of adults is mysterious. For adults, also children can be mysterious. For the you know, for one country, the other country which is seen as the enemy, what they're doing, that's mysterious, etc. So Rinpoche himself, of course, draws in these secular examples. Anyway, the thing is, what we mean with that is just what is not immediately evident. Also things like the future, our dreams, and so on. There's a whole realm in which there is mystery. So that's where we experience a dream, when we have dream, then the waking condition is mysterious. When we are awake, then dreaming condition is mysterious. So the whole notion of mystery is very relative. And of course, what is evident to some is mysterious to others. So mysteriousness is present even in our ordinary context, and that's where Rinpoche brings in the example of customs officials and smugglers that are mutually mysterious to each other. And there's the suspicion that is held by the customs officials who would view anybody, even those who are not smugglers, as potential smugglers, and paranoid smugglers who would view any customs officials as potential dangers, even if the customs officials might not be investigating them. So Rinpoche says, the explainable is always inherent in the inexplainable mysterious, and the unexplainable mysterious is always inherent in the explainable. The obvious and the mysterious is very relative. Sorry. So then Rinpoche says, smugglers have customs officials inherent within them, and customs officials have smugglers inherent within them. What is inherent manifests through suspicion, and they try to fool each other from one's mysteriousness to another's mysteriousness. So of course, this is just mutually not knowing what the other is, and yet the role that one might be mysterious to one could be reversed at any time. So what is mysterious to somebody one day is evident the next, and etc. Rinpoche says, samsara's mysteriousness, created by a dualistic mind, always causes us to be fooled. We cannot abandon samsara's mysteriousness unless we believe in nirvana's mysteriousness. If we reject nirvana's mysteriousness, it causes ignorance, while if we believe in it, we cannot be fooled by the objects of dualistic phenomena. Samsara's mysteriousness, created by dualistic mind, is always the cause of suffering, while nirvana's mysteriousness protects and releases us from suffering. So there's the whole intangible dimension of what causes our suffering, and this is very often where, like in Western context, we talk about the great mysteries of life and these kind of things, like nobody will ever know what the mystery of life is, and there's the whole sort of drama around the the philosopher's stone and the whole drama around the truth of life and all these things, where there's a inability to penetrate beyond the appearance, and yet knowing that there is something there. And that's where, particularly here, we're talking about samsara as the delusion that originates on the basis of invisible causes, namely ignorance, completely intangible. And we have, for example, the teaching on the 12 links of dependent origination, the teachings on the 5 skandhas, etc. In the Great Perfection, we talk about the ground tantra, the liberation and confusion of Samantabhadra, etc. These teachings all are about this mysteriousness, and yet the remedy for that is nirvana's mysteriousness, is the teaching itself that sees and understands what is it, what is the remedy. And so without the remedy of samsara's, you could say nirvana's mysteriousness, then we won't be freed. So that's where we need to, Rinpoche uses the word believe in it, in the sense that we need to apply this. And if we have that, then we're not deluded, we're not fooled by dualistic phenomena. And one more point, though, that's also important, obviously, is that, yes, to be stuck in samsara's mysteriousness, be stuck in dualistic mind, this is where we wander in suffering. To understand the nature of phenomena and understand the intangible qualities of wisdom or nirvana's mysteriousness, that is what releases us from such suffering. So if we don't understand Dharma, and that is understanding this mysteriousness of nirvana, then we don't understand anything. We don't understand what we're coming from. We don't understand what's going on. We don't understand what is the cause of suffering, what's the cause of freedom, samsara and nirvana. And we don't really understand the relationship between subject and object. And this is something that's only too obviously manifest within Western philosophy, Western science, neuroscience, etc. This is where the problem with materialist science, as much as it's extremely advanced in terms of the, you could say, manipulating the external material reality, completely is without an understanding of the nature of consciousness. And this is not in any way, you could say, an insult to neuroscience, because this is also on the, it's by its own admission, the mystery or the hard problem of science is consciousness. Well, there's a lot of understanding of what we call the soft problems, which is understanding correlation between experience and brain function and so on and so forth, that all operates within observing tangible matters. There is not an understanding of that which is intangible, and that's simply just not the scope of a science which exclusively operates with what can be objectified, quantified, measured, etc. So this is where we could say this is where Dharma constitutes really a greater science. So as long as we're stuck within this you could say culture of ignorance within ourselves and within the world around us, then we have this perpetuation of suffering. So that's where we can get caught in various extremes, holding phenomena as real, or then at the extreme saying, oh, there's nothing there, and so on. So that's where we get continually caught in the confusion and the misunderstanding of this dualistic condition. However, if we understand then the mysterious sublime, which is understanding then the Dharma, understanding the nature, understanding how our subjective nature constructs our reality in terms of its confusion, and also working backwards in terms of dismantling our subjective confusion and allowing for wisdom to emerge, this then can bring an end to suffering. So Thinley Norbu Rinpoche just says, mysterious sublime qualities are always beneficial. They cause mind to become less and less dependent on objects, allowing the unexplainable and explainable to join together inseparably. Sublime people no longer depend on subject and object or time and place, and cannot be fooled by samsara's mysterious phenomena. So simply this is where, on the basis of having properly insight into the qualities of the mysterious, the awakened condition, then we're freed from the ordinary dualistic confusion, and we're no longer depending on, like we looked at in earlier chapters, time, place, and so on. So these are, of course, time, place, or time, space. These are constructions that are basic to samsara, but they're also subtle and mysterious. So the purity of our own mind, that is the biggest mystery. This is what the Dharma is all about. So the Dharma is not something where we'd say, oh, there's an ism. There's Buddha's ism, we call it Buddhism, and then we have this thing that's set aside from other isms, and we essentially have another, you could say, camp, another position. And that's actually what the Dharma is not. The Dharma is, in some way, you could say, deprogramming this whole dualistic tendency that drives suffering in terms of saying this and that, and objectifying truth as something that is solid, tangible, and essentially what Rinpoche would call obstructed. So that's where identifying Dharma as religion that we do sometimes, and obviously we need to in conversation and so on, is actually inaccurate. And that's where Dharma is essentially just the expression of the abiding purity that we fail to see. It is mysterious, but it's what we need to, you could say, it needs to become evident. So from this mind, external phenomena then appear. We have dualistic clinging to the display, and then this then becomes solidified. And yet the nature of what is perceived then as something solid out there is something that is veiled. So the elements, they are increasingly mysterious. So that's why Rinpoche was saying you have earth, but even more, you could say subtle and intangible is water, even more intangible is fire, even more intangible is wind, and most intangible is space. Yet this space is something that's basic to all the elements. And this is also how then this space, this quality of the intangible is the origin, the source of all phenomena. So when we're fixating on phenomena, we're actually diminishing. We fail to understand phenomena. They're not appreciated for what they truly are. When we, on the other hand, don't do that, and when we allow things to simply be, allow them to exist, or we can interact with them through connecting without a conceptual projections, and to do that, having this an insight into unconfused mind, wisdom essence, then phenomena begin to dawn in a different way, which is where we see phenomena in their purity for what they actually are. So that's where we engage with this wisdom mind on the basis of various practices. For example, sadhana practice, in which we engage with the co-emergent wisdom that's introduced by the guru, and integrating that on the basis of meditating on wisdom, deity, and a sadhana, then we transform, or rather we acknowledge and recognize the purity of ourselves in the phenomenal world. And that's where we would say, when we visualize in this way, with that kind of recognition, then we recognize with wisdom mind, then the perceptions that we have, they arise as the display, not of our confusion or habitual perceptions, but as the display of wisdom, deity. So Rinpoche says, if we grasp a deity phenomena in our visualization without recognizing wisdom, deity, these phenomena become impure. But if we understand how to visualize through wisdom phenomena, we can transform demons' obstructed phenomena into deities' pure, unobstructed phenomena. So if we visualize, if we practice sadhana just as an ordinary exercise in thinking, then that's not going to help much. But if we do visualize on the basis of mingling with the teacher's wisdom, recognizing wisdom, co-emergent wisdom, whatever the nature of mind, however we do, and we mingle it with the sadhana practice, then anything there's no longer the ordinary confusion, which we could call the basis for the demon or the ego. So that's where ego is then liberated into deity. Demon's obstructed phenomena. The ordinary ego's obstructed phenomena, subject and object, is freed into wisdom or into deity's pure, unobstructed, non-dualistic phenomena. So Rinpoche says the Buddha's wisdom mind has mysterious wisdom power which never ends, is never stuck anywhere, and is never affected by samsara's obstructed, explainable phenomena. If we can recognize our own mysterious secret wisdom essence, which is the same from the beginning as Buddha's mysterious secret wisdom essence, then enlightenment is no longer mysterious to us, because inseparable from the Buddha, we are mysterious. So as we often see quoted from Shantideva, the absolute is not the scope of the ordinary mind. And so the wisdom is not something that we can explain. We can't limit it in terms of words words, thoughts, and so on, and expressions of any kind. But yet, this is what we aspire to realize, to experience. So when we experience this, then we're also experiencing what it is the Buddha had experienced. This, of course, doesn't mean that there's different ways that we can experience this. You might not immediately be enlightened, but yet at the same time, there is some taste of what it is that the Buddha's, you could say, mysterious nature is about. So Rinpoche ends this chapter saying, the earthquake cannot harm the mysterious sky, no matter how much its powerful shaking overturns and destroys. The ocean cannot harm the mysterious sky, no matter how much its turbulent waves flood and destroy. The fire cannot harm the mysterious sky, no matter how much its angry flames burn and destroy. The hurricane cannot harm the mysterious sky, no matter how much its violent winds blow and destroy. So that's also where we see in the prayer of Kunzangpo, where it says, even if the three worlds, even if the three worlds are destroyed, those who abide in wisdom are not fearful. So the unconditional, mysterious absolute is unconditioned, unharmed by the movements of the elements. Yeah, I think this picture must have been taken up in Rinpoche lived for many years in upstate New York, so it was probably taken there. The difference between samsara and nirvana is just a shift of mind, isn't it? Yes, that's it. It doesn't lie in the outer objects in any way. It's all about the mind. Yes, that's where also the prayer of Kunta Zampo, it says the difference between samsara and nirvana is the difference between awareness and unawareness. Healing. Now I'd like to make a further disclaimer here, in which Rinpoche he's referring to a lot of science that is basic to, and a lot of knowledge that's basic to what we could call sometimes a little bit mistakenly actually referred to as Tibetan medicine. Because Tibetan medicine is not particularly Tibetan. It's actually medicine that comes from the four tantras and originates with the sublime rishis. And so there's practice. There's also it's practice also Tibetan as such, even though anthropologists and others who look at gross Chinese and Ayurveda. In principle, the Tibetan medicine works with a lot of the things that Rinpoche are referring to in this chapter. So I'm a little bit limited in regards to, for example, Rinpoche talks about how the elements work together and how treatment can be given in terms of fire and water and so on. So that's where please refer to the details by reading this chapter itself. I'm more sort of just touching on the sort of the main themes, but not so much in the detail, which you can find in the reading, of course. And of course, always it applies. Please don't for a moment think that you're getting a digest of Rinpoche's words here. I simply couldn't do that. But we can together study this, and there's a lot of things in here which hopefully make sense. Could you talk a little bit more about how the mysteriousness of the deity can make us see it in a negative way? This is something I've experienced when coming to a new practice. Well, that's seeing deity in a dualistic sense, whereas that's seeing the deity as external. So the deity is the wisdom that abides within. So it's never separate from us. So coming to a new practice is just coming to a new way of beginning to, say, adjust ourselves, or adjusting a perception of ourselves, but very much with engaging in then the mysteriousness of our inner wisdom. So that's really just that, if you want me to say something about that, yes, that is when we misunderstand deity as something external to ourselves. And so that's where we need to appreciate the mysteriousness of the deity and the validity of the deity practice as the understanding that the deity is never separate from ourselves. I hope that makes sense. So Rinpoche here in the chapter on then healing, he says, according to wisdom mind, the elements of phenomena are unobstructed and pure. Pure phenomena are natural, unobscured, and uncontrived by gross elements. They are light, invisible, impenetrable, insubstantial, and indestructible because nothing remains inertly anywhere. When nothing remains, nothing can be diminished or enhanced. Where nothing can be diminished or enhanced, there is balance and purity. Where there is balance and purity, there is health. So what we think about as the elements, earth, water, or solid, fluid, etc., this really is just a gross manifestation of the inner invisible aspects, which is closer, again coming back to the lineage, closer to the secret essence nature, in which there's nothing that can be diminished or enhanced. And the closer we come to that, the greater health there is, in the sense that the greater we're close to the original purity. So health is always consolidated on the basis of balancing this innate purity. Of course, this is where we're working with sentient beings that are obscured, and continually there's an inability to perceive that, and particularly so that's where the doctor, if we have a good doctor who knows the medicine Rinpoche is talking about here, and which is very much what is, you could say, within the scope of what we then call Tibetan medicine, then doctors can work with that. But for the most part in the modern world, there's not really an awareness of that. There's very much this approach of just working with gross, what we here calling gross. All respect to doctors, by the way. What is, because they're working within their particular paradigm, which is about material, is the materialist view that, there's only what we can sort of, in terms of identify, in terms of anatomy and, the various ways of understanding illness, basically exclusively on working with the material. But of course, what we're talking about here is then a dimension of the subtle. And that's where we're proposing here. And what's implicit then in this medicine is the working with the subtle and working with really seeing, and this goes beyond just what we ordinarily refer to as holistic medicine, to also completely understanding the intangible wisdom essence that permeates and is beneath, is basic to the confused constructions of the karmic body. So that's where this perspective needs to be brought in terms of what we're talking about here. So in dualistic experience, then gross elements obscure the purity of phenomena. So that's where the external physical obscures what's underneath. The gross and substantial is subject to change, imbalance, and sickness. So that's where there's a you could say, within this greater holistic, greater tradition of wisdom medicine, there's an awareness of something inside that can be balanced. Doctors then need to see beyond the visible and gross dimensions of the elements. Otherwise, they're only treating symptoms and miss the subtle cause. So that's where there is a whole awareness. There's a whole science beyond the evident, the physical. But then again, we can also very well argue that this is evidence-based in terms of those who have unobscured vision, then have an awareness of this, and also the treatment of the external, very often on the basis of working with the subtle, very often does give visible, tangible results. So Thinley Norbu Rinpoche, referring to the doctor, then say he may treat obvious outer symptoms to obtain immediate specific visible results, which are only temporary, or he may treat subtler inner symptoms to obtain less visible, more balanced, and more gradual benefits. Then, while still temporary, come closer to the invisible source of the illness. But however subtle his treatment may be, if he perceives phenomena as separate from their pure essence, his ability to help will be limited. So even if we go beyond, you could say, ordinary medicine and work on the holistic aspect, then still, unless there is a real awareness of the pure essence, then there's still limitations to this. So Rinpoche says, as a result, proper medical treatment deals with illness by correcting imbalances in the elements from the subtlest point of view. To accomplish this, the 5 elements are combined into many different categories of treatment, according to many different systems of medicine. Because the elements are mutually dependent, they can be considered divided only in their specific applications for specific effects. The effectiveness of these divisions depends on the doctor's ability to recognize which pure elements in a patient are diminished and need to be increased, or which are too abundant and need to be decreased, and how to apply the treatment so that it will reach the subtlest levels in order to restore balance. So that's why Rinpoche also gives these examples of how you can treat particular deficiencies with, for example, one element, and the excess of others with another element, and how you can also combine these two. Like you were saying, you can work with water, you can work with fire, but then also you can combine the two. So there's the emergent property of vapor that could also work in terms of treatment. So the elements can be applied to themselves, like I was just saying, fire, water, and in combination. It depends on karma, whether we appreciate the value of the pure elements. And that's, of course, we grow up in a culture where what we're talking about presently is completely unknown. So that's where this is our karma, to be born into this, you could say, the materialist culture of materialist science. Some doctors would not understand how pure invisible elements are basic to gross conspicuous elements. So this we have particularly, of course, in the modern world of materialist science, but it's also something that is, you could say, the scope really of ordinary persons. And this is sort of what's implicit in the sort of the notion of the modern day empiricism, is that we're just looking at what is grossly conspicuous. But then again, like people like Alan Wallace make a solid case for, we need to expand our definition of what we call empirical. So without that kind of understanding, then such a doctor would not know how to balance the elements. So Rinpoche says, if the doctor understands and believes in the invisible wisdom essence of the elements, he can help his patients with subtle methods and comfort him through this belief, so that the natural balance of the patient's elements can be restored and his sickness can be healed. So again, working with the intangible. In terms of the way that we come into this world, then talking about the conception and the development of the embryo and so on, Rinpoche says the primary cause of rebirth is karma. So that's where we have the conditions of ignorance and the samskaras, then at the very basis that we have from previous life, and this then drives us forward. This we refer to then as karma. And then we have the consciousness driven by these conditions that seek out rebirth. And that's where they then mingle with the reference point of the parent sperm and ovum. So then we have in tantric science a very elaborate and clear understanding of how the 5 elements then interact to develop an embryo. And that's again where Rinpoche describes this in the text. Balance in the elements is essential for the mind of the child, although imbalance can also depend on the previous lives. This is where then what comes when we then have a child that emerges on the basis of balance between the parents, their compatibility and elements and so on. This is actually essential for the well-being of the child, but then also sometimes children have their own particular, what Rinpoche is going to be referring to as hysteria, which is when there's sort of an emotional component that controls us, that become excessively strong. And that's where we have this kind of imbalance that can manifest in kids or children. This, of course, could also not just necessarily about the parents, but it can also depend on previous lives. So Rinpoche says a child born with balanced elements will be born with a balanced mind. If the elements are not balanced at birth, it may result in a hysterical mind. Imbalances may be caused by uncomplementary elements with the contributing circumstances of the father's sperm and mother's egg. However, sometimes children of complementary parents are born with hysterical energy. In this case, the real source of hysteria is not the parents' physical bodies in this life, but the subtle invisible elements of the children's root circumstance, karmic energy from previous lives. So just a word on the term hysteria, which I think sort of falls pretty much along with sort of in the category of kleshas. So we talk about kleshas as afflicted states of mind, sometimes conflicting emotions, and it's said, and generally it is the agitated, afflicted, neurotic states of mind that drive our suffering. So these affect us mentally and even physically. But I'd like to just identify how Rinpoche's skill with language and his sensitivity to language sometimes is very accurate and also quite provocative. So we might not necessarily think of our condition because we could say, well, I'm a normal person, I don't have hysteria. But to some extent, we all have hysteria from the point of view of the way that we abuse and essentially fail to abide by, you could say, an innate sanity, an innate brilliant sanity, like Chögyam Trungpa would call it, and as such then generate the very condition that we would like the least, which is our own suffering. So in that way, this sort of you could say the afflicted nature of this situation could very well be termed hysteria, which Rinpoche then does here. So Rinpoche says hysteria can come about through external circumstances such as family, business, fame, power, dharma, and politics. So this is where you can have the conditions from previous karmic circumstances and also on the basis of external circumstances. Rinpoche says then, when the external circumstances appear temporarily bad, causing excessive depression, the mind's inner elements become agitated and lose their strength. This agitation causes instability of the inner elements, leaving the mind fragile like the blue flame of a flickering oil lamp whose fuel is almost spent. In this condition, the mind cannot expand among the balanced elements of equanimity. When external circumstances appear temporarily good, causing excessive elation, the mind's inner elements become agitated and overwhelmingly strong, causing the mind's energy to rise out of control like water under pressure, shooting out of an uncapped pipe. All the channels in the body are flooded and energy cannot be composed within the balanced elements of equanimity. So we can experience external conditions which are disagreeable, and this causes agitation. We can experience external circumstances which seem to be good. This also causes agitation. And all the while, as we're doing that, we exhaust our subtle elements, and also an extension of that, the physical elements. This also we can see with ourselves when we've sort of been wound up, then we're physically, even though it's just mentally, then we have mental exhaustion. And we could also be having a wonderful time and just so happy. And at the end of that, we also keel over exhausted. This, of course, also could sort of develop into particular pathologies then. So controlling elders with heavy energy can make children fearful. So this is additional ways in which this hysteria can develop, or this particularly strong afflicted states. When they grow up, having experienced this kind of controlling heavy energy, they might have stressed and hysterical minds. And Rinpoche very compassionately prescribes the remedy for that. He says, pleasant distraction is the antidote to this type of hysteria. This we also see in Tibetan medicine, where sometimes the condition that we call lung, which has a lot to do with, you could say, the hysterical condition, which, or prana, this is very often remedied by exactly that, needing safe surroundings, comfortable surroundings, friends, good circumstances, and so on. This can remedy this condition. Also then, interaction, and Rinpoche describes in some detail also how various ways in which people can come together, and also on the basis of having complementary elements that then gradually exhaust, and then the sort of uncomplementary energy then really brings about psychological suffering. So uncomplementary elements between people may result in hysteria. So this hysteria can also happen due to being scattered, when we're very excessively sort of occupied with the external phenomena, continually sort of absorbed in what's going on outside. We're just lost in dispersion. And again, remedy for that is quietude. Not talking so much, staying quiet, not having music, not having entertainments of various kinds. This can also remedy being sort of overly exposed to all sorts, and not just exposed, but it's more our own sort of getting tangled up in just being distracted and so concerned with what's going on outside. So it's not really that the problem doesn't lie in the object, it lies in the way that we allow ourselves to be scattered and dispersed. And then also Rinpoche mentions how competition may result in hysteria. So you have ambitious, driven persons, scientists or artists that are sort of keep persevering towards increased perfection, increased knowledge, and so on. So that's where hysteria can come from, going down rabbit holes. These are not literal rabbit holes, but you could say just focusing excessively and being obsessive around a particular theme, where we then are looking for some truth or something that we are sort of, there's some objective that we continually are obsessing about. So subtle elements, turbulence, can result in spinning out of control physically and mentally. So this is where us being caught up in these kind of conditions, and even if we don't spin out, you could say, conspicuously, this is essentially the condition of samsara, that we are physically and mentally afflicted by these kind of imbalances that we naturally have on the basis of our confusion. But that's also where Rinpoche gives some, he describes what happens when we get a little bit caught up in that. He says he's talking about how we become erratic and mindless in our movements, causing accidents. And he says, an external sign of hysteria is constant nervous movement. This can result in harmful accidents. When we reach for a cup, it breaks. When we cook, we burn or cut ourselves. When we walk, we fall. When we are with people, we become sad easily. When we talk, we blurt. When we lie down, we cannot sleep. When we sleep, we have turbulent and threatening dreams. When we think, before one thought has ended, another begins. So that happens. Again, indicative of this turbulence. So it says hysteria can also produce specific external illnesses because conceptions are inseparable from karmic air, which contains all the elements. As long as our ordinary mind remains obscured and imbalanced, we will continue to become hysterical through our impure element conceptions. Because our ordinary mind constantly needs an object, we never acknowledge that wisdom mind goes beyond conceptions. So again, this so much comes down to understanding really what we could call the primacy of mind, where we in the modern world very often think in terms of primacy of matter, and we think that mind is an emergent property of biological systems or tangible systems. Whereas what here we're talking about is that it's the exact opposite way around. In terms of our ordinary reality, it is entirely premised on this mind that it gets entangled in duality. And the way out of that is the mind that's free from duality, as long as we don't have this wisdom mind that goes beyond the ordinary dualistic conceptions. Rinpoche says, if we are hysterical, we cannot find the vast, pure, secret essence of the elements, no matter how often or constantly we try. We become more and more divided and stuck when there is no space, no rest, and no more belief in vast space beyond conception. Because subtle and gross elements depend constantly on each other, we are reborn into these same turbulent, gross element bodies with the same hysterical, subtle elements mind. Rinpoche says, experienced doctors understand that the best way to balance the elements is through appropriate subtle medicines, such as visualization, yoga breathing, exercises, and meditation. Meditation or watching the mind is especially effective for diminishing pain and curing sickness. Through watching, the basis for pain and sickness dissolves because pain and sickness are conceptions and are within the gross elements. Through this watching, gross elements dissolve into subtle elements, and subtle elements become lighter and lighter until there is only clear space, and the five elements pervade inconspicuously and inseparably beyond any conception of sickness and pain. Then selfless, clear space mind, balanced from the beginning, is free from all distinction between pure and impure elements. So this is then the healing. We understand, and this again, what underlies the message here is an identification of how we spin off into imbalance, and at the same time also this message is given together with what actually can be done proactively in terms of us addressing this issue. Okay. You know, I was reading this today, and I was, just talking about this, just that we can remedy this with elements like healthy eating and so forth. And a story came to mind. I'll see if this is a story he tells about his visit to Honolulu, where there was somebody there that he encountered. Yeah. Okay. Somebody's asking questions which might lie beyond my ability actually to answer. It's things like karmic air. Rinpoche mentions in there, and of course, I have a vague idea what it is, but I would say if questions around some of the elements interacting there, the air, fire, and so on, I would simply just suggest to read Rinpoche's work better, because it's really something where you'd actually need to understand the implication more than I do. So I'd like to make a little bit of disclaimer, not being a doctor in this, well, not being a doctor, period. Do Tibetan doctors play with the five elements to heal patients? Well, they don't play, but yes, they work with the five elements to heal patients. So they are Tantra practitioners as well, very much, yes, and need to have certain level of realization. Well, whether or not they have complete realization, that's hard to say, but they definitely practice sadhana. So they're definitely practitioners that have a knowledge of you could say, the the condition of abiding purity, which is really basic to the tantric vision. And also they would, to a large extent, be persons who are practitioners. So it's very often that you have doctors who are not just, you could say, doctors in the ordinary sense, but also sages, people with if not, you could say, perfect realization, then certainly great practice. How do we recognize pure essence of phenomena? Now that I can answer just from the point of view that this is synonymous really with the objective of the path, which is wisdom. So the pure essence of phenomena is the unobscured condition that we aspire to through the practice of the Dharma. So all Dharma really is pointing to bring us back and heal ourselves, establishing our connection with this pure essence of phenomena. So the bottom line is, how do we recognize that? By the practice of Dharma. Years ago, a work incident led me to getting PTSD, Lung, and Rinpoche specifically this chapter literally helped me heal. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. Can you say more about karmic air? Well, karmic air is, again, this is a little bit in the realm of medicine, but it is generally the energy that constructs our person. So very much you could say karmic air is what brings us from one situation to the next. So it's the energy that drives our being, the sort of the élan vital, the sort of life force, you could say. But this is very much something also that we work with all along the board, really within Vajrayana practice, like also with the recitation of the mantras and so on. Can you please talk more about karmic air? Is that like the 8th consciousness, where karmic seeds are stored? Well, yes, in that sense, okay, yes, we could say that. We could say that the 8th consciousness, the alaya vijnana, that is where the karmic seeds are stored, and we would say they operate within what we call vasanas, or karmic patterning, and these would be driven by karmic air. So that's where you would say on the basis of the original ground of unconsciousness, the alaya vijnana, then the elements of earth, water, etc., they then manifest from there. And it's particularly then on the basis of karma then that they take particular shapes. Please, is there an explanation why highly realized masters are dying from illnesses like cancer, etc.? There is such an explanation. Remember when His Holiness the 16th Karmapa passed away in 1980? We particularly would say this was really because His Holiness took on the illnesses, or he took on the karma of sentient beings. So we very often have, this is also why in Tibetan Buddhism, there's nobody who really wants to have the roles of being teachers, because of course, you can practice much better when you're inconspicuous and quiet. But great teachers like His Holiness Karmapa and great masters, they take on they interact and take on the karma and the, say, obscurations of others. Do gross elements dissolve into subtle elements because in watching them, your conceptions about them break down, and in breaking down, we see them more truly as they are? Yes, that is where we have less, we solidify less that which brings us to, you could say, projected solidity and obstruct phenomena, which is the clinging to the self. So when we are less caught up in our concepts that drive narratives that solidify the duality between self and other, and when we dissolve this, we also dissolve the afflictions, and we also dissolve the impure ways in which we perceive self, other, and in general, it's sort of the ways that we create, we obstruct phenomena, as using Rinpoche's words, right? But the way that we objectify phenomena. So that's where, in watching when in watching mind and in watching not being engaged in confusion, the way that we do this in general, according to the practice of shamatha vipassana, and also particularly then through the engaging of wisdom in the Vajrayana context, according to the pith instructions, then what we are doing is relinquishing the ordinary fixation on our concepts. Could your slides from all the sessions please be shared for personal use only, of course, but they're helpful to give a good review. Okay, what I normally do is at the end I then make a PDF. I save them as a PDF, and then I sort of merge it into. I can't remember if I merge it into one big PDF or have them as separate. But anyway, yeah, I'll make them available. Please remind me in case I forget. So do you think that Tibetan medicine, say the ones for lung, can introduce states of deep meditation? What is the difference between such induced meditation and meditation that we practice? Well, we talk about lung and we talk about mind and prana as being inseparable. So anytime that we're meditating, then we're also automatically working with prana. And we can sometimes use that to our advantage, which is then what we call the path of means, upaya marga. What is it again? Yeah, Taplam, path of means, where we work with yoga. So that's where we work with the prana and so on. So that's something that is used in Vajrayana practice, particularly in what we call the second empowerment. The secret empowerment works a lot with nadi and prana. But deep states of meditation, you know, this is an interesting word, because deep states of meditation is really just greater clarity. So it's not like we want to go into a deep trance of any kind or anything particularly mystical. It's really just that we would essentially, with this kind of prana practice, we allow what we call the karmic winds to settle in what we call the avaduti, or the central channel. The pink, what is it again? Yeah, the central channel. I was going to try to attempt what the word in Hatha Yoga is. I think it might be Ida Pingala and Sushumna, but I'm not sure. But anyway, the Avaduti, yeah. So that's where this kind of practice, it not so much induces a deep state of meditation. It's more just it frees us from our ordinary dualistic concepts. Is Yutok Nyingtik the main practice for Tibetan doctors? I don't know, but certainly in my neighborhood, yes. The doctors that I knew, Tibetan doctors, I think they would practice the Yutok Nyingtik, but there are many. This is a particularly profound practice, but there are also others, and of course, particularly then you have, I mean, yeah, I shouldn't say more, but yes, and I can't say if it's the main practice for Tibetan doctors. I can't say, but I know it's a very important practice. Yeah. On page 56 of the book, it goes, until a scholar has complete confidence in his wisdom mind, he must practice secretly and alone. What is complete confidence? So that's where I think you're probably referring to this incident of this character, the what's his name, source of teachings, right? And yeah, so that's where it would be what was particularly the point here is that he went against his teacher's advice. His teachers could see that he was not quite ripe. So to a large extent, the teacher would say, okay, now you're ready to serve sentient beings. But it would mean that somebody no longer is obscured and, you could say, liable to be deceived by, by the demons that we looked at before, self-righteousness demon and self-absorption demon, for example. How do we know if our confidence is complete or not? Yeah, relying on the teacher. Why a practitioner must practice secretly and alone, not following? No, it is following a guru or practice within a group. Yeah, group practice is very important, such as group online Tara. Yeah. No, that's all right. No, I didn't mean that sort of in that sense, but it more just means that we're working on ourselves. So even all of us in the Sangha, we're practicing together. We we're working together on that, but we each individually are taking the role of students and not as teachers. Thinley Norbu Rinpoche mentions karmic air in the formation and development of the embryo and baby. That's right, yes. Shushumna, okay, thank you. Could you please elaborate more about the healthy eating you have just mentioned? What is healthy eating from the perspective of this text? I actually don't know, but I'll read you this story if you have time. What is Rinpoche referring to when he says Dharma may result in imbalances among the elements resulting hysteria? Yeah, that's when Dharma is abused, and that's where we sometimes talk about spiritual materialism, or where Dharma basically serves the you know, where we engage in the Dharma with the wrong motivation. You know, we're lacking compassion, we're lacking wisdom, and essentially we're just perpetuating the habitual muscle of our ego and our ego's project. Okay, I'll finish off with a little funny story, which is there's two stories that I found, and I'll see if I can read the other one also. But it was about this. So this is from a book that it's called Echoes. I think Bodhinath teachings or something like that. So these are teachings Rinpoche gave in the late 70s in Nepal to a small group of students. I think this was translated by somebody called Shaka Dorje. Anyway, he says, there's a fellow called Mark in Honolulu. This is Rinpoche, so this is in the 70s, right, late 70s, that he was traveling around places like the States. Mark seems to be some sort of Hindu, but it's hard to say what he really is. Mark is a farmer. Nobody gets along with him, and he does not get along with anyone. He's always angry with somebody, and his activities do not conform to the general norm. Never wears any clothes, for one thing. He comes into the temple there completely naked and does prostrations in front of the image. The women can shout and scream as much as they like and tell him to get out of the temple, but he pays no attention. He sits down and meditates right in the middle of the temple, and whether he is causing a disturbance does not bother him at all. I liked him very much, and we used to go everywhere together in Honolulu. He is totally artificial and totally himself. People invited me to lunch a lot in Honolulu, and I always went with Mark. Mark knew I was under medical care and that I had to have special food. People would try to prepare food specially, and Mark would always get angry with them. He would tell them their food was no good and just full of chemicals. Mark was a natural food fanatic, and he would never let me eat it. Mark would often prepare food for me himself, but I could never eat it. Mark never used salt. In fact, there were hundreds of things Mark never used. He would make a vast quantity of something vaguely like Tibetan tsampa for me to eat and force me to eat all of it. He would never let me leave until I finished it. Mark was completely straightforward. He was almost like a siddha. He was so unofficial. At about 5 in the morning, he would pound on my door, and as soon as I would open it, he would shove a huge bowl of this stuff in my hand and leave immediately. When I saw Mark for the last time, I told him I would always remember the three things he had taught me: natural food, natural activity, and natural mind. And I said, I hope we would meet again. Okay. I thought that was a funny story I'd share with you. Okay. So on page 60, bottom part, it goes, when we transform a demon into wisdom deity, if we grasp a deity phenomena in our visualization without recognizing wisdom deity, these phenomena become impure. How do we transfer a demon into wisdom deity? How do we visualize with recognizing wisdom deity? What we're talking about here is not engaging with the practice of visualization according to our ordinary conception of self. It's not thinking I am deity in the habitual sense, but recognizing the wisdom that we engage, experience on the basis of mingling our mind with the wisdom of the teacher. So on the basis of Guru Yoga, engaging with the teacher's wisdom, we say the teacher's wisdom and our mind mingle inseparably. So there's a space which is not constructed by self, that's free from self. So we could say this is Vipassana. This is the kind of where we would say the Vajrayana is particular, because in general, on the general Buddhist path, we would say it takes a very long time to eliminate confusion. But we would say on the basis of the teacher's blessing, and this is the special quality of the Vajrayana path, then confusion gives way to an understanding. On the basis of the devotion of the student, compassion of the teacher, this quality of blessing can emerge, in which the student could have some experience of that which is not owned by the ordinary afflicted or confused mind, the ordinary dualistic mind. And it is this which we bring onto the path of sadhana and deity practice. So that's where we say the way to transfer, to engage with wisdom deity, how to recognize wisdom deity, is on the basis of praying to the teacher and the practice of Guru Yoga. Natural food, natural activity, natural mind. Yes, that's it. Yeah. Okay, on that note, so we'll conclude here. Thank you. So for next time, oh yes, one thing. Next Thursday, I won't be able to have a class. I hope you'll pardon me. And so we'll continue on the 28th. And also, since we're a little bit behind, we might just go a little bit over time. I think we were scheduled to finish the 28th, and I think we talked about maybe going a bit further. It might actually be, I think, might go as far as to November 4th, if not the 11th. I hope that's okay. Somebody very kindly said, listeners, rush the magic dance. So I hope that's okay. But for next time then, for October 28th, please read these chapters: Energy and Power, Respect and Tradition. Okay. By this, by the way, is this translation of the dedication prayer. This is actually by Rinpoche himself. Somebody very kindly sent me this. So this is Rinpoche's. The first prayer is translated from the Tibetan by Thinley Norbu Rinpoche. By this accumulation of merit, may I obtain all-seeing omniscience, and may all faults be defeated. The whirling, turbulent waves of birth, aging, sickness, and death, from this ocean of samsara, may I liberate beings. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Ever absorbed in the display of divine forms and primordial awareness, appearance, sound, and perception in the state of divinities, mantras, and dharmakaya, may I, inseparable from the practice of the profound and secret great yoga, attain, within the essence of mind, the state of one taste. Thank you.